At several points in Imperial history, it has been deemed necessary to create new chapters of Adeptus Astartes. Though these events are somewhat rare, having only happened a few dozen times in 10 millennia, without them, the Space Marines would be a far less powerful presence than they are today. However, whilst many of them passed without incident or true note, some have become renowned or reviled for the actions of the chapters created in them. In this log, we shall explore how and why these events come to pass, before highlighting the most known of them and exploring a bit of the reasoning behind them. From the unofficial first in the days of the Space Marine Legions to the most recent Ultima after the return of Robert Guilliman, they are collectively known as the Space Marine Foundings. This is Tactica Imperialis, and welcome to 40k Stories. The broadly targeted number of Space Marine chapters has historically been about 1,000. This was the number either defined or suggested by the Codex Astartes, or it just happened to be how many that could be made when the Codex was penned by Robert Guilliman. However, in a galaxy as hostile as the Milky Way, maintaining that number was never going to be possible indefinitely, and many chapters would be wiped out to the last man by various conflicts. Surviving but weakened chapters could slowly rebuild, of course, but fully destroyed ones would need to be replaced by new ones to keep the total at 1,000. It is when said replacements are deemed necessary that a founding will take place. There isn't a new founding every time a chapter is wiped out, but rather a bulk founding takes place when it is deemed that reinforcements are necessary. This means that foundings do not have a timetable, nor are there any guidelines about when to hold one. It seems to be entirely at the discretion of the High Lords of Terror who will order it to take place. However, it is by no means a swift or simple process, and the preparations both before and after a founding is announced can take generations to complete. To name just a few of the necessary tasks, a suitable homeworld and recruitable populace must be found for the chapter in waiting, which may also involve terraforming to ensure a defensible base, and their power armor and fleet must be built, the latter being extremely important if the chapter is to be fleet-based, since a suitable home-based ship is needed. The Adeptus Mechanicus are actually the ones responsible for the entirety of the founding process. Their explorators, along with rogue traders, can earmark suitable worlds, and entire forge worlds can be turned over to the creation of armor and the like. However, it is undoubtedly gene seed that provides the greatest hurdle to jump in terms of both risk and of time. Even within the body of an Astartes, it takes 10 years for implanted gene seed to mature and be prepared for extraction, creating 2 progenoid glands that can be used to create 2 new sets of gene seed. The Mechanicus will use this same process to fabricate the necessary gene seed for the foundation of a chapter, using slaves as opposed to Space Marines since they're A, more replaceable, and B, far less likely to die on a battlefield during the maturing process. It is said that from implantation in a single slave, an entire chapter of gene seed can be created in a little over half a century. Actually ran the sums, if you double the number every decade, you get 1,000 from one in about a century with 24 left over, assuming there's no other mutations in place, so they've got it down to an art. The original gene seed used at the start of the process usually comes from the tithes of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Every existing chapter must submit 5% of its gene seed to the Martian priesthood, and there are no exceptions. Likely there are gene seed stocks in cold storage from the days of the legions, both traitor and loyalist, but it seems as though the tithes do the bulk of the work. Once the resources are in place and a suitable populace has been chosen for the desired chapters in that founding, said chapters will be officially created. The Senatorum Imperialis issues an edict to allow it, along with the document known as a writ of succession for each chapter's primogenitor, and eventually the chapters will be ready and deployed where they are needed. There are exceptions to this in very, very rare cases. It is said that the crusading chapter, the Disciples of Caliban, were founded in late M37 by the personal demand of the Dark Angel's Supreme Grand Master of the time, though I could not find another case of a chapter master leveraging a new chapter into being like this. Whatever the circumstances behind them, once a chapter is founded, it is equipped with its fleet and released to its homeworld where applicable, at which point it broadly becomes self-sufficient, at the very least in terms of recruitment. Obviously, it might not have forges on hand for weapons and armor, but in terms of keeping itself topped up with recruits, all up to the chapter at that point. There have been, officially at least, 27 foundings throughout the history of the Adeptus Astartes. The first founding wasn't known as such at the time, as it wasn't even a chapter founding at all. This was the creation of the Legiones Astartes by the Emperor himself at the dawn of the Great Crusade, and though the legions were reinforced as time passed in the Crusade, no new Astartes forces were created until after the Horus Heresy. 7 years after Horus's death and the Emperor's internment on the Golden Throne, Robert Guilliman penned the Codex Astartes and the legions were broken up into the chapters we know today. This event is known as the Second Founding, definitely the largest founding before the Primaris era and potentially the largest of all in terms of number of chapters created. The chapters who retained the names and homeworlds of the primogenitor legions were retroactively named as the First Founding chapters, and some, if not all, of the Second Founding would go out and create their own homeworlds by declaring what is known as a right of conquest. See, for example, the Flesh Tearers, a Blood Angel successor who colonized the world of Cretacia. Exactly how many Second Founding chapters were created from the Legion division is unknown, though that's not for lack of trying. A document was penned in M33, known as the Apocrypha of Davio, that attempted to catalogue them all, but it was never actually completed. In terms of the primogenitors, every legion sired a number of chapters depending on their own numbers after the heresy. The Salamanders, for example, could not even sire a single successor. They didn't even have a full chapter worth of Astartes in their own ranks at that time, and for some reason they've never officially been sire to one since. Apparently there was a deal struck between Guilliman and Vulcan, which is odd, but there you go. At the other end of the scale, the Ultramarines were the ones to found the most successors. According to another document, the Apocrypha of Scaros, believed to be the earliest version of the Codex Astartes, 23 chapters were sired from Guilliman's sons, though I can only find records of 17 as the Apocrypha didn't care to list them all. In fact, that number seems really low to my mind, as the official list of chapters that I can find would give a total of about 50 chapters of Astartes immediately after the Second Founding, which is basically none compared to the supposed 1,000 that the Codex suggests. I mean, I know the Horus Heresy and presumably the Great Scouring took a toll on the legions, but I'm at a complete loss on this one. Where is the other 90-odd%? I don't get it. Things get even more strange when you look at the Third Founding, created at the behest of Rogel Dawn, and thus possibly before the Black Crusades even began. In this founding, apparently more than 100 writs of succession were given out and distributed amongst the first and second founding chapters. Admittedly, we only know a handful of those third founding chapters, so by extrapolating percentages, we may have enough chapters out there after the second, but, well, just but, we don't know. We've explored the tales of many second founding chapters in the past. Flesh Tearers, Soul Drinkers, Black Templars, and Crimson Fists all have their own logs out there in the archives somewhere. The Silver Skulls, aside from the Ultramarines, are an interesting case who may well get their own log in future, and the Grey Knights, chapter 666, do technically count despite not coming from a legion. But there is one chapter that barely made it out of infancy from the second founding. The Wolf Brothers, unsurprisingly drawn from the Space Wolves given the name, were the first in a planned series of chapters known as the Sons of Rus that would form a cordon around the Eye of Terror. However, the flaw in the Space Wolves gene seed put paid to that particular plan, as the Wolf Brothers succumbed to massive mutations, most notably the Curse of the Wolfen. Whether this was because they weren't Fenrisian is unclear, but the chapter was officially disbanded by the Inquisition not long after its inception. However, the Wolf Brothers do actually still exist in pockets today. A squad was found serving under a former Red Scorpion who had later joined the Red Corsairs, and Logan Grimnar hunted one down that was in stasis, wresting it away from Fabius Bile and the Black Legion. Following the second founding, the records of the various foundings do get a lot more patchy. A few notable names show up along the way as we pass through history, with the size of the Emperor from the third founding being among the best known. However, when we reach the 13th founding, things become a bit more interesting and outside the norm. This founding is known today as the Dark Founding, so named for the lack of knowledge on the whole affair. Not all of the gene seed that was used is accounted for, and it is unknown exactly how many chapters hail from the Dark Founding and thus exist today. The reason for the obscurity can likely be pinned largely on one chapter founded at this time: the Exorcists. Being created from Grey Knight gene seed, as we explored in a recent log, it makes sense that information about them, and thus the wider founding, is obscured in case something gets out. There is, however, one other known chapter from the Dark Founding: the Death Spectres, a Raven Guard successor with a gene seed flaw that led to the Marines becoming albino, and who may also get a log in future. The Crimson Sabres, who would of course become the Chaos Warband the Crimson Slaughter, are supposedly from the Dark Founding too, though sadly I don't really have any evidence to back that one up. The next interesting founding was actually the largest save the second, and took place in late M35. This was the 21st founding, though it is rarely known as such today, instead being known as the Cursed Founding. It is known as such because, despite the attempts of the Adeptus Mechanicus to rectify gene seed flaws, the chapters of this founding all seem to have been afflicted rather than aided by their modifications. In fact, in early M37, there was apparently a debate held on whether the Cursed Founding chapters should even be allowed to exist, such was the deviance created here. Part of me wonders if a certain Belisarius Call had a hand in the 21st founding, since gene seed experimentation broadly seems to be his thing, but unfortunately I can't prove it. The chapters of the Cursed Founding are names many will recognise, with the Minotaurs, who seem to have come out quite lucky by simply being berserkers, being one we've explored before. The Firehawks, believed by some to be ancestors to the Legion of the Damned, also hail from the 21st, as do the Lamenters, a Blood Angel successor supposedly less affected by the flaw, but who also suffered horrendous ill fortune. They were part of the 9th Black Crusade, but were abandoned by the Mortifactors allied to them due to their cursed founding origins, before running straight into a warp storm and getting lost for a period of time. After later siding with the Separatists in the Badab War, but being allowed to return to the fold after a penitent crusade, the Lamenters fell foul of High Fleet Kraken whilst on said crusade, and were nearly wiped out for a second time. Though the Blood Angels have tried and failed to contact their wayward cousins due to their supposed reduction in the flaw, in recent times the Lamenters have been forced to found their own death company as the Black Rage becomes stronger and stronger within them, showing that for all the modification, they didn't get it right. Two of the more obviously mutated chapters from the Cursed Founding are the Flame Falcons and the Black Dragons, both of unknown primogenitors, though the latter is rumoured by some to hail from the Salamanders despite having no official Salamander successors. The Flame Falcons seemingly had the ability to self-immolate, and the corruption within them was deemed so severe as to warrant their annihilation by none other than the Grey Knights. The Black Dragons, on the other hand, have inconsistency in their mutation as it only affects some of them, but those individuals known as the Dragon Claws sprout bony growths from their heads and their arms. Their entire skeleton can expand and grow, meaning that Dragon Claws stand much taller than other Black Dragons, and the ability to retract the arm blades they have at will and even coat them in adamantium makes them lethal close combat troops. And yet, despite the obvious, glaringly obvious mutations, Black Dragon gene seed is considered as pure every time a tithe is begrudgingly sent to the Mechanicus, which allays most, but also raises eyebrows within an Imperium and an Inquisition likely just waiting for the smallest excuse to put the hammer down and annihilate them. Foundings 22 through 26 are rather unknown, unfortunately, though a couple of interesting chapters do still show up. First is the Star Phantoms of the 23rd Founding, known otherwise as the Sentinel Founding, in order to shore up the weak points of the galaxy in late M37 or early M38. The Star Phantoms are suspected as Dark Angel's successors, though they and the Sons of the Lion refute this. And despite being the frontline force in the climatic battle of the Badab War, their achievements are often shrouded, and they were actually suspected of heresy for a time after the end of the Macarian Crusade. Next and last is the last known founded chapter, the Mentors or the Mentor Legion from the 26th Founding. Designated Chapter 888 as a replacement to a wiped out 25th founding chapter, the Mentors are a secretive bunch that spend much of their time doing military studies and the like. They loan their squads to various campaigns rather than going out on their own, extracting as much knowledge as they can and gaining as much experience as they can along the way. They're also used for Imperial technology testing, putting their vast for their age skills to damn good use. However, though the 26th is the last numbered founding, there has been one more in recent times. On the order of Robert Gilman after the Terran Crusade, a new founding was undertaken known as the Ultima Founding. This founding was the one in which the various chapters of Primaris Space Marines were officially created, though uniquely it was not solely used for chapter creation, but also for reinforcing existing ones with the new crop of Astartes. Admittedly, not all of the chapters were created in one go, as a large chunk of Primaris Marines did not have a chapter for much of the Indomitus Crusade that followed. Half of the created Primaris were instead part of forces known collectively as the Unnumbered Sons, large forces with mixed lineages in an attempt to prevent repeating history with misunderstandings between chapters and legions in the past. There were 9 legion-like groups of Unnumbered Sons, also known as Grey Shields for their iconography, but as the Crusade progressed their ranks were thinned both by battlefield casualties and by the orders of Guilliman, who had found new chapters when appropriate or reinforced existing chapters when they were found. This was the more common action though, since there are of course a lot of chapters out there. There are many known Ultima Founding chapters, most interestingly being the Wolf Spear that was founded from the gene seed of Leman Russ, the first Space Wolf successor since the second founding. Born from the Unnumbered Sons, the Wolf Spear were left to guard the warp rift known as the Pit of Rorkos after one of the final battles of the Indomitus Crusade, but as it stands, we're unsure exactly how the Space Wolves will treat their Primaris cousins, despite officially accepting them into their ranks. First created from the line of Jagtai Khan in this founding were the Storm Reapers, who have taken an unknown location Ferrowald called Jagan as their own. They've served alongside the Grey Knights already in their careers. I wonder how Mind Wipes work on Primaris, helping to stop a massive crusade led by nothing more than a bloodthirster. The Dark Angels have 2 known sires, the Angels of Defiance and the Blades of Vengeance. Little is known of their campaign records, but it is said they embody different qualities of Lionel Johnson, and it will be interesting to see how they are treated now that the Circle Primaris has been established in the Dark Angels themselves. The Imperial Fists have one known successor, the Ultima Founding, the Sons of the Phoenix, who seem to be more like the Black Templars than other Sons of Rogel Dawn. They have run afoul of the Thousand Sons, who have captured many for experimentation, but their crusades and ecclesiastical entourage continue on. Another non-imperial party with an unsurprisingly vested interest in the Ultima Founding's creations is the primogenitor himself, Fabius Bile. Though we do not believe he has captured any for modification at this moment, after witnessing the Nemesaurs chapter, Gene Line Unknown, on the world Agrathane Excelia, he is absolutely seeking them out. The Ultramarines, surprising no one given A, they had the Primarch, and B, they had the most successes the first time, have the most chapters of Primaris Marines as well. 10 of these were charged with protecting the re-expanded Ultramar Empire, including the Praetors of Ultramar and the Void Tridents, whose homeworld is the ocean world of Talassar that Captain Sicarius hails from and rules. One of the Ultramarine successors shows just how old this Primaris project was, as the chapter The Fulminators was actually founded all the way back in late M31 as the Great Scouring came to an end. Created from the most promising of Terra's Astra Militarum recruitment pool, their combat record is also unknown, but I suspect that after 10,000 years, they're chomping at the bit to get into the action. There are no known successors of the Salamanders, again, or the Iron Hands at this time, and if those chapters do receive reinforcement and cousins from the Primaris Marines, I'll be interested to see how both their gene seed and tendencies affect them. I'm looking at you, Iron Hands. I also wonder if there will be another founding in the near future, and whether it will have a name like the Ultima Founding or a number like every single one before. Also, will it be all Primaris or regular Astartes? A mix? Will they use some gene seed that Belisarius Core wants to use that Guilliman doesn't want to use? I know Guilliman isn't a huge fan of Primaris, but they're an undeniable asset, and they're probably the future of the Space Marines regardless. So I think the founding after Ultima, whenever that comes, will be a fascinating thing to track. And there you have it, a look into the various Space Marine foundings throughout history. Originally, I'd planned just to look at the Cursed Founding, but there was plenty of interesting information dotted through many foundings, and so if a chapter is extremely interesting, I'll cover it in full in a future log. Either way, the foundings allow us to track somewhat the times when the Imperium was at its weakest, since foundings were often in response to lost chapters in the majority of cases. How they'll pan out in future, I'm curious to see, what with Primaris now in the mix, but whatever happens, it will take nothing away from the legacy of the Legiones and Adeptus Astartes. Now then, on to the next of our champions of humanity, I think. It's only fair to my mind that we go visit the chapter perhaps most profoundly affected by the Ultima Founding. Oh, not the Ultramarines. Instead, I wish to visit the potential successor to the chapter that until recently was unable to sire any from off their home world. This individual is young, but youth is no issue to these Astartes, and his drive and his saga will see him rise to the top if he lives long enough to get there. For now though, thank you for watching Tactica Imperialis, and I'll see you all again. Goodbye.